can't orient myself very well with everything that's here, well, from what it was 50 years ago.
There's Johnny Hayden right there with his back to us.
Taking you for an orientation flight and they dumped you off.
Well, a lot of the buildings that we had then is gone. The smokestack is gone.
Changed. The only thing I recognize is Muscle Mountain.
This is the first one he's been to. It's 50 years ago.
I can't even remember my own name, so how do you expect me to remember others?
The men of the 1st Special Service Force have come home to Helena, Montana. They see their old friends.
Well, I could have seen you not knowing who you were.
Yeah, well, that's the same one.
I have to look twice to recognize some of them.
Oh, God. Well, it makes you feel a little younger, but the bones don't feel any different.
And they see where they were trained in secret, preparing for battle in World War II.
And that's Muscle Mountain. Yeah. The tower is gone. There's hardly anything left.
The 1st Special Service Force, later dubbed the Black Devils Brigade, was a secret, specially trained group of commandos from both the United States and Canada. They were the predecessors of the Army's elite Green Beret, or Special Forces units. They trained at Fort William Henry Harrison in Helena, Montana. They married local girls, and following the war, many returned to the city and made it their home. And now, over 50 years later, they have returned to their adopted hometown of Helena to meet old friends, see the old places, remember the old times, and once again, march together as a unit. In 1942, America had just entered World War II. Secret plans began circulating among the Allies calling for a specially trained commando unit. In June, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Frederick of the War Department General Staff, who had worked on the initial plan, was made commander of the yet unnamed group. Frederick wanted his men ready for a target date in late December. The unit would include both U.S. and Canadian troops in the spirit of Allied cooperation. This film, taken by Army photographers and owned by the 1st Special Service Force Association, is the only record of the group's secret training. In addition to rigorous physical training, the men would concentrate on parachute, weapons, demolitions, skiing, rock climbing, and cold weather combat, as well as operation of an experimental snow vehicle called the Weasel. The unit would be the most elite fighting force ever formed in American or Canadian Army history.
Well, they told me it was a force of extremely hazardous duty. We were going to parachute, and we'd be committed on these hazardous missions probably before the year was out, and that was 1942.
Right in the middle of a class, I was asked to report to the headquarters. After arriving, I was interviewed by a Major Wickham, who identified himself as the adjutant of the 1st Special Service Force, Plow Project, as they called it in those days. And he shoved a paper in front of me and he said, is this your signature? I said, yes. He says, you have been selected to join the Plow Project in Helena, Montana. You have 4 hours to clear this post and be on your way.
The only criteria at the time was you had to have had some experience in cold weather living, or snow and skis. And of course, having been born in northern Minnesota, cold weather was no stranger to me, so I volunteered.
Well, it sounded interesting, and I'd been involved. My father was a machinist. I was involved in mechanics, and so I thought that this might be something a little different than just polishing artillery rifle guns every morning.
Frederick decided that Fort William Henry Harrison in Helena, Montana offered the best training opportunities.
Having arrived the day before, we went to the Placer Hotel and spent the night, and they was supposed to report the next morning. Well, this fellow's name was Lieutenant Brown, and he said, let's go out to the fort and see what we're getting into. I said, no, tomorrow's soon enough. He says, well, I'm going to go take a cab and go out. And he didn't come back and didn't come back and didn't come back. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, he shows up and he's pretty well looped. I said, this is a heck of a note. You get tanked before we have to report. And he says, well, you see what we're getting into.
Well, it was a rather bleak place, and although I think, having been forewarned of what I expected, why we were issued a sleeping bag and had a tent, so we slept on the floor there. And no stoves in the tents or anything like that. It looks pretty rugged, you know.
On July 2nd, 1942, the War Department activated the 1st Special Service Force. An insignia of crossed arrows and a shoulder patch of a red spearhead with a white USA and Canada were chosen. With the preliminaries out of the way, it was time to move the force to Helena. American recruits were picked up all over the West by train.
It was a secret train, all blacked out. We couldn't get off, nor did anybody else get on except at designated points. And I think the train, we could kind of conjure up directions. It went south, and it went east, and it went north, and then finally west, and it came to a stop, and the doors opened, and the first thing we spotted were the twin towers of the cathedral. So we knew it was Helena, Montana.
When the men arrived, work on Fort Harrison was continuing. It was not what the men expected.
We had visions of tree-lined boulevards and this type. And when we showed up, it's tents and a few permanent barracks with dust up above your ankles. A lot of construction going on.
Well, that year it was awful dry. It looked like partly desert, you know, we got here. But the camp itself was all tents, you know. They had the tents set up then.
We reported in. They assigned us to a tent, gave us a pair of coveralls, a pair of jump boots, and told us to report back in 15 minutes. We reported back. They said, right face, double time march, and we never quit running from that time on.
Within 2 weeks of arrival in Helena, each recruit was already up in a C-47 aircraft preparing for his first parachute jump.
No, I think it was better that way, really. You didn't have the tower. A lot of people are afraid of heights that will jump out of airplanes. But the tower weed a lot of people out.
The pre-jump training, I don't know whether that's all that necessary or not. If they teach you how to land, mainly.
Everybody's scared. Anybody that tells you that they weren't scared in jumping is crazy. They're not telling the truth.
First jump was absolutely no problem. You just bailed out. But you were a little apprehensive on the second and third.
Our call was Geronimo, or was Powder River instead of Geronimo, in keeping with Montana. And I went out the door. We're supposed to yell Powder River to kind of relieve the tension and look up, see your canopies open, and it was a fairly low-level jump. We thought it was awful low level, but it was considered quite high. After we got on the ground, this Major Pierce came over to me and he says, "What was that you yelled when you went out the door?" And I said, "Judas Priest."
The accelerated parachute program separated the sheep from the goats. Those who wouldn't jump or were seriously injured were transferred out of the force, usually the same day.
The biggest share of them that left the outfit was because they wouldn't jump. And the biggest share of those that refused to jump were pushed out anyway, and after they once did it, a lot of them would repeat it. But if they didn't jump, when the plane landed at the Helena airport, by the time you jumped and got your chute back to the packing sheds and got back to your quarters, they were gone.
While the American troops were already beginning conditioning and parachute training, the Canadians were still on their way from reception centers in Ottawa and Winnipeg. By mid-August, 2 Canadian units were in place and had completed the jump program. August 15th, Colonel Frederick awards 1,200 men with jump qualification badges at a parade in front of the city of Helena. It was the first time the entire force ranked up and counted off, but it was the jump badge, or buzzard clause, that really excited the men.
Well, it was quite an honor for us, you know. to become a parachute troop with 2 jumps, you know.
Well, it was great, and it meant $50 a month more, which was even greater. So that's primarily what a lot of them went for, was the jump pay.
What was a day like for the 1st Special Service Force? Reveille sounded at 4:45. By 8, mess and calisthenics were over, and the troops were in the middle of running a 1.25-mile obstacle course. Following a 1-hour lunch, training continued until 5. 4 nights a week, required lectures were held from 7 to 9. Promptness and speed were strictly enforced. Coming late to training was inexcusable. Those who couldn't make it were transferred out.
An awful lot of people that couldn't march long distances. There were an awful lot of people that couldn't parachute, and there were an awful lot of people that couldn't stand the cold weather, and others that couldn't ski, and it was an easy way to weed them all out, you know.
Intense competition existed between regiments. Colonel Frederick set up a 60-mile course and held marching competitions.
There's a little mountain behind Fort Harrison called Pine Mountain. Their main deal was to have us get up there as fast as we could, one unit going up one side and one unit up the other, so we could get there first.
Well, it was all real strenuous physical training. And you take off across country double time, and it was just amazing how strung out your platoon would be, or your company would be, by the time you got to your destination, which might be the hilltop 2 or 3 miles away.
Then a lot of them, when we had the long hikes, fell apart at the seams due to the long hikes that we had. Couldn't stand the, we'd come off a 60-mile hike and your boots were full of blood, or perspiration, if you will.
Each man had to be qualified with every weapon, and special firing ranges were built at Fort Harrison. In late September, demolitions experts and explosives arrived.
We were taught how to arm, I think they called it RS. It was an explosive forerunner, I think, of the new plastic explosives. And we blew up some bridges around Helena here.
They blew up quite a few things they shouldn't have, I guess. Old mining shacks, and little bridges, and all kinds of stuff, you know.
A former detective and officer from the Shanghai International Police came in to teach hand-to-hand combat. Pat O'Neill taught the force a simpler type of fighting than judo.
Unarmed combat, the kicks, dirty fighting, really dirty fighting. All the dirty fighting you can think of, you know. And he taught us all the dirty kicks and the dirty fighting with your fingers and your hands.
And it carried along with us even in civilian life. When the soldiers would get in a little hand-to-hand combat in town with other people, they'd kind of, by reaction, go to it, and they injured some people.
In late fall, ski training begins with long hikes carrying ski poles.
That was to get our arms and legs in shape. For example, over here is Hogback Mountain, and they took us clear behind Hogback Mountain in trucks. We spent the night, and then we hiked back about 40 miles with full packs, and with these sticks like ski poles, and we had to work those all the way. Well, after 40 miles of that, you're in pretty good shape.
Snow came to the Helena Valley in December of 1942, and the final cold weather training begins. Norwegian ski instructors are brought in to complete the training. Training began slowly, but by the end of the second week, all the men had completed the course. Not all enjoyed the so-called torture boards on the long cross-country treks.
That was strenuous. That was a lot of work. Skiing's not easy, really. And ours would have to be, I'm sure, described as cross-country rather than downhill type of skiing.
The boots that we had put a pressure point on one of my ankles, and it got so tender that I didn't want to turn. All I wanted to do was go straight down. And instead of getting better, it got worse. I tried all kinds of rubber supports and everything else, But my ankle bone on my left leg just got so tender that it was terrible.
They'd take us uphill all day. I mean, every place you went was uphill. And the only time you went to come downhill was coming the last half a mile into camp. Then you'd ski down there. You know, that's when all the guys would collapse on the hill.
Advanced ski training took the force to higher slopes at Blossburg on the Continental Divide near Helena. The higher into the mountains they went, the colder it got.
That was a cold winter in '43, you bet. It got 30, 40 below zero many times.
But we had a lot of snow that year, and we skied on Mount Helena, which was very unusual to have that much snow to ski there.
The Norwegians made us strip to the waist and scrub each other's backs and our chest with snow to get acclimatized after daybreak, and so that I think that got us acclimatized to the cold weather real quick.
By the end of February, the instructors reported that 95% of the force could ski up to Norwegian Army standards. As ski training continued, the men began work with a specially designed combat vehicle called the Weasel that was developed for use in the snow.
All winter, all types of training. They towed us behind the Weasels on ski and took us up on the passes, Mullen Pass, all through the hills. Lots of training, and we all had to drive them too, you know, handle them.
It was a kind of a temperamental little machine. It had a couple of drawbacks. One of them, it would throw a track, even though the tracks were about 18 inches wide. If you made a tried to make a sharp turn, well, you could throw a track very easily. So you had to learn how to put it back on, which took a bit of doing.
Training continued day after day, but the troops did have weekends off, and they made the best of the free time.
Always Saturday morning parade. Everybody cleaned up, shaved, and appear on parade, and by 10 to 11 o'clock, I think 11 o'clock, everybody was dispersed, and then you were on your own.
Did a lot of walking, and I went to mine shafts and visited mine shafts, and in the wintertime I skied.
We'd sightsee, go to Butte, go to the old Rocky Mountain Cafe to have dinner. A lot of them would go on hikes even. It was just the shape we were in, we just wanted to see it as much as we could.
Went to town, danced all night, drank all night, played all night, went to Butte or Great Falls, you know. Had fun, that's all.
A special relationship developed between the townspeople and the members of the force. Helena adopted the force as its own. The relationships remained even as the troops left for battle and for many years after.
If anybody did not become acquainted with the citizenry of Helena, it was their fault, because the people of Helena were certainly generous with their time, with their homes, with their daughters, with their vehicles.
They treated us really great. And that's why all the force members really love Helena. Even the ones that didn't come back here always want to come back, you know, and they do. And they keep in touch with a lot of people here.
The town people were so enthusiastic about the unit being here that they would come out in their cars on a Saturday and pick us up and take us to their homes and feed us Sunday dinners particularly.
That's why this has always been considered the home of the force. You know, many homes were open to force members, particularly on weekends.
The people of Helena often came out to the fort to see special events, such as the company parachute jumps.
If we had a mass jump, they'd start showing up at daylight to get a spot to look. And then, of course, everybody would say, well, I'm jumping out at so-and-so time, and I'll throw out a roll of toilet paper so you can see who I am. Well, when the stick would go out, there'd be 3 or 4 rolls of toilet paper go up. Well, you don't know who was who because they were far enough away from the jump area.
Like soldiers everywhere, many of the men captured the hearts of the local young women. Nearly 200 marriages were performed.
Well, personally, I was one of the first ones in the force to get married. We weren't supposed to be married when we arrived. We were supposed to be single. Well, I got married on a Thursday. Saturday, another couple got married, and it snowballed. And before we were through, there was quite a few married ones when we were all supposed to be single.
April 6th, 1943. It was time to go, and the force marched down the streets of Helena for the last time. Among those on the reviewing stand are Colonel Frederick and Montana's governor, Sam Ford. It was a tearful goodbye for both the troops and the city.
I just got married, so I had a lot of thoughts, but of course we expected it. Just kind of sad, you know, leaving, that's all. Otherwise, we knew we were kind of anxious to get going.
My wife was pregnant, and I had a lot of mixed feelings about leaving at that time, but there was no choice. We hated to leave Helena.
I personally didn't have any bad feeling about it. I don't think any of the force had any bad feeling other to get a job done that we were assigned to do.
Well, it was pretty tearful. Everybody, we knew we were leaving, and all our good friends among the civilian people, the citizens of Helena. Yeah, it was heartrending at times, the goodbyes. But that's war. Had to go.
I knew I was coming back, period.
The force headed to the East Coast for amphibious training and then to war, first in the Aleutian Islands and then in Italy and southern France. The legend of the force was made in Italy on the beachhead at Anzio. Soldiers blackened their faces and went behind German lines at night. Using daggers, they cut their enemies' throats and earned the nickname the Black Devil's Brigade. One entry in the diary of a dead German soldier read, "The Black Devils are all around us every time we come into the line. We never hear them come." Each time the Devil's Brigade went behind enemy lines, they left stickers on dead Nazis that said, "The worst is yet to come." The 1st Special Service Force was the first Allied unit to enter Rome. Mark Radcliffe led the task force that first entered the Holy City on June 4th, 1944, just 2 days before the Allied invasion of France. After the liberation of Italy, they moved into southern France. With the Allied forces well on their way to victory in Europe, the War Department decided that a special binational commando unit was no longer needed. On December 5th, 1944, the force ranked up for the final time, and as the Canadians broke rank and marched away, the 1st Special Service Force was gone. What began at dusty Fort Harrison in Helena, Montana, ended halfway around the world in southern France. The war took its toll on the unit. Over 2,300 men had been wounded, and over 400 were missing in action or killed. On the way home from Europe, the now separate American and Canadian units created the 1st Special Service Force Association, keeping at least the memory alive. Its first task was to build a monument in honor of the dead.
Well, the monument came about when the USS Helena was sunk. We all took up a donation to help build a new one, and they, some way in the process, the bureaucratic process, they couldn't accept it. So we took these funds and decided that we'd build a monument with it.
The monument wasn't the only thing the force gave to the city of Helena. Over 40 members returned there to live. Many remain.
I married a girl here, and I was a Canadian. And I was going to come back to the States anyway. And I fell in love with the mountains around here when we were here, and so I wanted to come back.
My wife and kids had come out here in the summer, and they wanted to come back here, so as far as I was concerned, I would conquer any ground I walked on. So
It was just a foregone conclusion that if I was fortunate enough to come through alive, that this would be home. And I've never regretted that either.
Helena hosted the first reunion of the 1st Special Service Force in 1947, the year the monument was completed and dedicated in Veterans Park. At reunion time, the 1st Special Service Force marches together once again. Reunions are held every year, alternating between the East and West Coasts and the United States and Canada. They always include August 15th, the day the force first ranked up and marched together.
It's just amazed me how many people show up at these reunions regardless of where we conduct them. whether it's in Canada or East Coast or West Coast. And percentage-wise, I think we get more that show up for our reunions for the number of people we had than a division or a brigade or something else.
The uniqueness, I think, comes from it being a small unit and really getting to know each other and instigating this program to meet. And since then, it has continued to go, and we're still very close.
It was the best esprit de corps I've ever seen in any outfit, anywhere. And the more we get together, the more we want to get together. And it's the only people you can talk to about the force, to know what it was all about, you know. If you told people what you really went through, they wouldn't believe you anyway, you know. But we can cuss each other and talk about it once a year, and it's great, you know.
I know what they went through and how tough it was, whether it was Blossburg or going into Rome, jumping from house to house, or whatever it was a hell of an ordeal, and there was a lot of risk involved. And by God, if there's any amenities that life can provide, why, they deserve them, I think, you know.
Over the years, as more and more was written about the 1st Special Service Force, the myth and legend have grown. In 1968, the story captured Hollywood's attention. United Artists' movie The Devil's Brigade, starring William Holden as Colonel Frederick, premiered in Helena. While most enjoyed the movie, not everyone liked the way parts of their exploits were handled.
Well, I think the idea was good, but I'm bitter like some of the others, why they had to go to Utah to make it, why they used Utah National Guard for the GIs rather than the Montana National Guard, because we've got just as good of conditions here as they had down there, and they could have based them at Fort Harrison.
Some of it was done for the picture itself, I'm sure, that, you know, to create a little interest. But a good part of it was in reality.
But they can't make them things into a movie like that, you know.
I think they made lovers out of us, not fighters.
But I think there was a meeting there. It was valor and showed patriotism. And
it was entertaining, like my kids liked it. They liked it, see. But most of the guys didn't really care for it too much.
The Devil's Brigade.
Joseph Dobbin, Marinette, Wisconsin. Howard McIntosh of Cannon Company, Kelowna, BC.
On the 50th anniversary in 1992, the 1st Special Service Force Association dedicated a new monument to commemorate the names of their dead.
Kentucky. Ferdinand Dittrich, Massapequa, New York. Getty Page, Fort Myers, Florida.
This special group of men trained together in Helena, Montana, went to war together in Europe, and now reunite each year to keep the memories of their deeds alive.
Dismiss!
They say the reunions and the memories will continue. And each summer, the 1st Special Service Force, the Devil's Brigade, will be remembered as an important part of Helena's and the military's past and present.
First of all, the training was very rigorous. And when you're under great demands, it brings about good friendships, you know.
We were the leaders. We secured beachheads and beaches and that sort of maneuvering. You're bound to get shot at.
It was life and death so many times, and when they pulled through together, why, the warmth and the friendship and the family feeling, the relationship is cemented, and admiration for each other is a great thing.
It was the same camaraderie that was built from the very origin of the unit.
It's the same esprit de corps that we always had, and having a home base, building this monument and having something to tie to.
Most of the fellows are retiring, and families are grown if they have them, and the families, quite a number of the members' families are being involved a little.
One big family. and it's getting better as we get older. We're mellower, but the same old spirit is still alive.
When you're at every reunion, you see somebody that you haven't seen for 20 or 30 years, maybe 40 years.
Seeing them all again, and it brings back 1942 and 43 again. There's a genuine feeling and understanding that you have between the people, you know.
It'll go on. It'll go on until we all go. Then we'll have to assign this to somebody else.